What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the channel this morning. I already had a cup of coffee a little later this morning. Got up early, did some stuff, shipped a bunch of whatnot stuff, etc. Went to Blade Show yesterday. Got me a sweet new polished Mike Erie blade. Kind of cool. This is a ProTech, but Mike Erie did a hand grind on it, which is pretty neat. Got a bunch of stuff. Me and Brianna went. It was fun. So here's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about guitar stuff and time. Okay. And this isn't really, if you are a person who watches every video and then just takes the most negative thing out of it, which we have a bunch of you in the comments, all you're saying is cheap stuff is cheap and better is blah, blah, blah. Like, if you're one of those guys, then you're probably not going to like this video. Because we're going to talk about age. And, it's often said that the age of folks who's into vintage things is getting older, and that's true. It's true. It's just the way the time marches. But where it has really come up lately is with this digital amp deal. So, we just did this AI, this positive grid reactor video. And one of the biggest things that people say is, what's going to happen in 15 years when nobody's supporting the software? What's going to happen when it breaks? I'm not going to be able to fix it, et cetera, et cetera. And it got me thinking about age and about how we have a time perspective problem as a whole in guitar land. What's going to happen in 25 years when they stop supporting the software? Well, okay, let's think about this a little bit, and think about time perspective. Okay. Which is really hard. It's really easy to lose track of it, right? It's hard to do this. So let's just take a second and kind of lay everything out. The electric guitar is about 70 years old ish, right? Let's call it that. I mean, I know we could go back to the frying pan and stuff, but like the Telecaster, so we're talking about 70 years. So 1950, Telecaster, 1952, the Les Paul, 1954, the Stratocaster. That entire industry, electric guitars, is actually very, very young. In fact, electric bass guitars is much younger than that by a decade almost. So when you compare that to pianos, violins, brass instruments, acoustic instruments, it's very, very young. That this whole industry that we love so much is not that old. There are some of you, I don't have one, but there are some of you that have vintage cars that are older than an electric guitar, right? If you have an old Willys coupe, it's older than the electric guitar, right? So, like a 50s hot rod, for example. I used to have a 51 Chevy truck. That's older than a Telecaster, right? So, these kinds of things are, it's hard to take this into consideration. Now think about the digital stuff, okay? Digital stuff's not new. The Line 6 pod is almost 30 years old. And I know that's not a good example of digital technology, but what I'm talking about is the march of it and where it falls in digital, in guitar history. So we're talking about almost half of the entire history of electric guitar, there has been a digital amp. Almost half. That's hard to put into thinking, to think about. The Kemper has been around since 2011, largely unchanged and fully supported. Now they've made some improvements, but even the hardware is still usable with the new improvements, most of it. So we're talking about, what is that? 25, 15 years. Okay, we'll call it 15, 16 years. The Helix, 2015. Quad Cortex, 2021, and the Tonex, 2022. So we're talking almost 30 years of digital technology. Again, I want you to really think about this. Half of electric guitars, and literally half when you think about the actual marketability of it, right? Not everybody was buying electric guitars that early. So basically half. At what point do we stop calling digital technology new? If it's half of all electric guitar history has existed. Now, here's the other thing I want you to think about. If you are 25 years old, I bring this up all the time. My daughter's 25. She's never lived in a time with no touchscreens. She's 25 years old, a quarter of a century old, and she has lived her entire life with a touchscreen that she could hold in her hand. Okay? If you're 25 years old, digital technology in the guitar industry has basically existed your entire guitar playing life. Your entire guitar playing life. For many players, this is the case. For many players, we want to keep making guitar playing, we want people to keep playing. We don't want this to die. Okay. Well, then what you have to do is you have to give people a technology that they're willing to use. And anybody about that age, okay, which mind you, a 30-year-old is 35-year-old is in that same ballpark of age when we talk about using of technology, half of guitar history, okay, and they exist in it. But the reason age is a problem, I don't mean it's a problem like the whole ageism thing. We could get into all that. I don't want to do that to anybody, but we're just trying to remember how old we are. It's tough to come up with this. So a 65-year-old person, okay. So my dad's 79. Okay, so he's a little older, but so let's say a 65-year-old person, right? Many of you are in the comments. 60-year-old person, 55-year-old person, okay? You have experienced through your guitar playing career the dominance of tube amps, obviously, because it's all we had. We had the solid state stuff going through the 70s and 80s, JC, like a Roland 120, all the PV stuff, right? We had early bad digital like the Pod. We had better digital stuff. And now we have modern digital stuff, right? So to you, digital technology seems new, seems weird, seems bad, seems like it's never going to be good enough, etc., etc. Because you remember a time before it existed. You remember a time before the internet existed. You remember a time before we had to log into everything, right? Like, it's just how it is. We're that old. I'm that old, I lived before the internet and after the internet. I'm like I'm a crossover of it. So, but to a 25-year-old, recording with a DI, shopping profiles, setting up profiles, using presets, all those things, their reality is different because they live in a time period where that is the case. They just have a different reference point for this technology. So the reason this is important, and we'll get into it in a minute because we want to talk about how long this stuff is going to last, right? But I want to put this time perspective into play. Half of all of guitar technology, electric guitar technology, digital has existed. Half, okay? Nearly half. Nears makes no difference for our conversation. I just really want you to really think about that. And then how it applies to price. Okay. So there's a lot, there's no reason a Gibson Les Paul should be $3,500 or $2,800 or whatever, depending on the model. I remember when they were $800. I remember when you could get a Strat for $500 made in the United States. I remember when you get a tube amp for whatever. It's because we've lived through every price increase. We've lived through every economic and the associated economic maybe hardship. My dad always talks about having to sell a couch to buy a guitar when he was younger. We've all had that emotional connection to price, especially back in the day when it was like I had to, I lived in an apartment. I remember as a kid, we got together as a family and said, we're selling all the furniture and buying a drum set and we're going to sit on cushions in the living room. Literally that happened at my house. this is how dedicated we were to music. Those kinds of things, they matter. Like, and that was the kind of thing. But now a younger person in the day of the way we view money now, and money's not real because it's all digital. You know what I mean? $3,500 for a guitar is what it costs. It's just what it costs. That's the price, because they don't have any reference or memory for a time when a Les Paul was $800. They just don't know it because they didn't live then, right? So we feel that more emotionally because we were there, and they aren't, and so they just, okay, it's whatever. It's what it costs. I'm just gonna buy it. I'm throw it on a Sweetwater card, and I'm gonna buy it. It's it's just how it is. Just kind of reality. Because our perspectives in life and how old we are and what we've experienced and what we had to do to get where we are in life. It took me years, decades to be able to afford a D28. You know what I mean? Like, it took a long time, and now I have one. It's cool, but it took a long time. Because that shapes how we value things. It shapes how much we value things. It took me a long time to get that guitar. That's one of my favorite possessions because it took me a long time. It means something to me. It shapes how we view imports. It shapes how we view inexpensive guitars. This is one of the reasons why I feel like import guitars are kind of disposable, because I don't have an emotional connection to them. For many folks who play those guitars and that's all they know, like the stuff from China and all that, that's what they learned on. That's their first guitar. That's whatever, right? Like they have a more emotional connection to it. It's not that one is better or worse in the sake of your guitar sucks and mine is better. It's just that this is what I know, and you know what you know, and we all know something different. It shapes how we value almost every guitar argument that we have, the time. Okay. So now that we understand and have really thought about this whole time perspective thing, let's talk about the actual issue with the digital amp versus the tube amp thing besides tone. Okay. So everybody wants to talk about tone, but that's not what we're talking about. Okay. You can talk about how much they suck if you want. That's fine. But there's a lot of folks that disagree with you, and there's a lot of folks that understand the value of digital technology. Okay. So, and they understand how it works in their workflow, because that's really what it comes down to, is workflow. Yes, we all know that it's a compromise. Yes, I think all of us as guitar players would rather have a room full of tube amps. We know this. We're not arguing this. But there is a utility and an advantage in many cases for digital stuff. So we don't need to argue that. We understand that as much as people want to argue it. We understand the difference. We understand that they're not exactly the same. We understand that we are compromising this or that to do one or the other, and they're just tools. We get that, okay? The biggest thing that people, I think, have been bringing up lately is, I'd rather have a tube amp because if it breaks, I can fix it, okay? So I want to talk about reliability versus repairability. Okay, those are two different words that many people conflate, as in mix up, use interchangeably when they have this conversation. That is not reliability. Okay, that's repairability. Reliability is how often does it fail and how much does it cost to fix it. Okay, repairability is what happens when it fails. Can I fix it? Those are two completely different arguments, and they apply differently, and they are both present in both of these conversations. Okay. So when we're talking about an AI enabled amplifier that costs $450, which is bonkers, versus a tube amp. Tube amps are actually, they have more consumable parts in them than a digital product does. Okay, so they have things that wear out: power tubes, preamp tubes, tube sockets because of the heat, capacitors. We all know this. Pots and switches, just like a digital amp has that too. But the things that are different is the tubes, the amps, the transformers, and the caps probably are the biggest things because of a lot of voltage, a lot of current, and a lot of heat. A tube amp is literally designed around components that age. They are light bulbs that burn out. And not only do they burn out, they also fatigue and lose performance over time. So maintenance is part of ownership with the tube amp, and it always will be because they are actually designed to do this. That's what they're designed for. Digital amps, so their reliability, there is a compromised reliability inherent to their design. Okay, digital gear is almost boringly reliable. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You don't have to rebias. You don't have to retube. You don't have to match tubes. You don't have to do anything. You turn it on and it just works. Okay. And people will say, yeah, well, until it doesn't. Okay. Think about the digital products that are around your house. You probably have a television that has 15, 20 years old. Maybe. You may have, there's all kinds of stuff. Your internet router, gaming systems. Now we could talk about the red light of death and various things that have happened with various gaming systems over time, red ring of death. But when we think about a computer or a gaming system that is on for literally hundreds, thousands of hours and never shuts off and never fails, this computer is on almost 24/7. I could have this computer for probably, I won't, but I could probably have it for 10 years and it will continue to work and it will be on like all the time. This monitor, same thing, right? This is the same technology, the same type of power supplies, the same type of everything that is in a digital amp. My 3D printer, that thing can run for hundreds of hours with almost no maintenance. The mechanical side of it needs maintenance, but the digital side never needs maintenance. It's bonkers. Phones, like everything, your telephone is on for literally thousands of hours a year, and it never fails. Now, sometimes they will because there will be a design defect, whatever. But they operate for years without maintenance. Nothing goes wrong with them. Well, people will say, well, yeah, I have a 1968 Fender, whatever. I have a black panel Fender that still works. Okay, that's cool. But there's a lot that didn't. There's a lot that don't. Percentage-wise, there's a lot that don't. Nobody brags, well, my Helix, I've had my Helix for 12 years now, and it never breaks. Nobody brags about that because it's expected. That's part of it. Digital reliability doesn't create a story on the internet, so you just never hear about it, right? Unless it breaks, and then you do hear about it, and then all the tube people are like, yeah, well, my tube amp never breaks. Well, it does, actually, and it wears out. And if we think about this, so let's think about repairability versus reliability. So you have a tube amp that's infinitely more repairable, right? Because it has replaceable parts. And you have a digital product that is not repairable. Okay. So you have the tube amp that's more repairable, but it's less reliable. And you have the digital product that is not repairable, but is way more reliable. So let's parse this out a little bit. It costs about $200. So if you're going to have your amps, your tubes replaced, and $200 to $250, okay, in 2026 to right around there. If you Google around, it's, it could go either way, but let's just say $200 to $250 to replace tubes and rebias everything, make sure everything's working good, okay? And you get 5 to 8 years for the most of us if we play a lot out of a set of tubes. Now, okay, stop arguing about it. We're just going to use it for average. If you Google this and you look around, it's an average, okay? Well, my amp lasted blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever, fine. I'm sure. That's cool. I'm happy for you. So 5 to 8 years. So you got to do that. So you have, what do we go back to, about 15 years? To 2015. So 11 years. So let's say 8 years. So let's pretend that in that time period, you got to get your amp retubed and rebiased twice, $500. Okay. In the same time period that a Line 6 Helix has existed, which has no maintenance whatsoever, and you can buy one for $500. So what you have here is a wash, right? And you can argue the intricacies of that all you want, but the reliability versus repairability argument is valid. It's a 100% valid thing. But when you like look at the time, it is an investment to own a tube product. Now let's talk about the future support question, because that's a big one. What happens in 15 years when this company is not around anymore? Blah 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 blah. Okay, they don't support the software anymore. Okay, let's take Kemper for example. Kemper's been around for what I think about 15 years. What did I say? I have the date written down here. Hang on. Kemper's 2011. So, okay, we'll call it 15 years. Okay, so they have been around for 15 years and they are supporting everything just fine. We have to go back to this time perspective situation. 15 years is what? 25% of the entire history of electric guitar history. That's a fairly good track record. 15 years is a fairly good track record of supporting product. As tube production shrinks, as parts become more scarce, as fewer amp techs exist because they're all getting old and dying, and that expertise disappears, you tell me which technology is shrinking and which technology is growing, which technology is going to be more supported and which technology is going to be less supported. There will always be a niche for tube amp techs and etc. Like me, I'm a pickup winder. That is a dying breed. There will always be a niche for me. I think I will always be able to make a living doing this. I will never get rich at it, but I will always make a living doing it because you and I love this stuff, and we will always, right? There will always be a tube amp tech, but you're going to have to send your amp further. You're going to have to spend more money to get it fixed, and it's going to be more of a novelty thing, where digital products have far more investment. They have far more support. They have far more market share. There's far more expertise into the development of them and the infrastructure surrounding them. For example, how a piece of software gets developed, how a piece of software gets supported, how a piece of software gets, because we're talking about software here, the hardware is easy. It's the software part, how it integrates with the hardware. That's the hard part. So all of those things are only getting better, and that technology is growing and growing and growing because that's the way the world is going. So when you think about how something was supported in 1985, when your Apple IIe died, versus now, I can fix almost any software issue in 15 minutes with a live chat, right? How often, if your tube amp dies today, how long is it going to be until it works again? A month? Right? So there are certain things about it I get, but at the same time, we need to continue to look at this time thing and go like, holy smokes. Yeah, it's like digital stuff's actually going to be more supported, not less. The company, Positive Grid, for example, they've been around for 15 years. They've been around for 15 years developing this software. They're not going anywhere. And with every product that they make, they're becoming more and more successful and more stable in the market. These are not flash in the pan companies. Kemper's not a flash in the pan. Axe-Fx is not a flash in the pan. Tonex is not a flash in the pan. Remember, they've started with software, moved to hardware, right? The same thing with Positive Grid. They started with hard software and moved to hardware. And the software is continuing to improve. The hardware is almost an afterthought. It's just an easy thing to do for them because that's already been done. So this is just going to keep getting better. and more supported, not less. Anyway, just a weird time perspective thing for all of us to think about, because holy smokes, I didn't realize, even for me, when I got some of these dates all together, I didn't realize the proportion of time. Digital products have been around for almost half of guitar history.